Hello, and welcome to another exciting edition of Dr. K's Psychobabble, where we're going to be looking at the concept of imposterism, which is usually in the popular literature and whatnot is referred to as imposter syndrome. And you may have heard of this, you may not, that's fine. We're going to start off with some definitions here, looking at this phenomenon that occurs not only among professionals and experts in the field, but among many people who feel a number of identified concepts related to their own achievements. So, what we know of as imposterism includes the perceptions of individuals that other people have an inflated perception of their abilities, that the truth is not what other people see. Secondly, an intense, sometimes, fear that our true abilities will be uncovered, we will be revealed, we will be found out. And finally, an attribution of our success to luck and other external factors. Now, some of you may identify with this. Some of you might see yourselves in a position where wherever you are at your work, at your family or whatever, and you're looking, you're saying, other people think I'm great, but I look in the mirror and I don't see that. I don't, whatever. And then at the same time, you're thinking, I'm going to get, one of these days, they're going to discover that their feelings about me are totally off, and that's going to be very embarrassing because, truthfully, any sort of success is a result of luck. Or we have to first understand, okay, as we look at this, this is not a accurate perception of most of us. So let's take a look at some of what research has told us about the real facts behind this. In fact, imposterism occurs regardless of gender, race, age, occupation. It's agnostic, meaning it affects many people across all of these areas. It is not tied to depression, anxiety, or self-esteem issues, although it may contribute to some of those. But a person who has imposterism does not necessarily have depression, anxiety, or self-esteem issues. So it's quite universal. So the first thing that we need to talk about today is you're not alone. Many people feel this. I am going to tell my own story of imposterism and how I feel about that, and looking at some really good strategies to address that so it's not so problematic, it doesn't get in the way as much. Now, for some individuals, just like any aspect of quote-unquote abnormal thinking, we have that range of, for some people, it's a little bit of a bother. For some people, it can be extremely interrupting to their lives. It can keep them from actually being successful or taking the steps to be successful, applying for the job, writing the book, whatever. And just that, you can imagine a lot of people might say, I have a story to tell of a book. And then there's that part of them that comes, yeah, but my story's not important. The things that I did, I had a lot of help. It's not really about, and it's like, there it starts. This whole sort of self-talk about, I'm not really that great. And now keep in mind, we're not all trying to be narcissists here at the same time. We're not trying to inflate our egos beyond what we would normally expect, but we do want to keep ourselves from tying ourselves into this idea that other people are perceiving us way more than we are, and that we're going to get found out, and that most of our success is by luck. So let's take a look at this concept as it has occurred, again, in the literature here. It was first encountered by Clance and Imes, and in all reality, Clance's original work is still kind of seen as the best work done on this. And look at the date, 1978, decades ago. So as I've often said in my classes, a lot of what we experience, we have this concept of imposter syndrome, for example. We think of that as sort of a new concept sometimes when we first encounter it, and we think, oh, that's just being discovered. Some of this stuff has been around for a really long time. So sometimes we look at that old literature and we kind of trace its path, and we see, where have we gone with this? And as with many things in psychology, what we experience is that in terms of measuring this, in terms of like a clinical tool that we can use to determine, well, how much imposterism does somebody have, there's no gold standard. Now, gold standard is a phrase used in many industries. We have the gold standard for software, we have gold standards for quality, we have gold standards for music, and then of course we have gold standards for the measurement of things in psychology. And so here we have there's a research study in preparation for today. I read an article about an evaluation of the different tools that have been created. And in the world of psychology, what will often happen is somebody will try and take on a concept like imposterism, and they'll come up with a definition, and then they'll create a tool that asks questions and measures those pieces that relate to that definition, so they can both reaffirm their definition about what imposterism means in this particular case, and develop a tool to measure it both for research and application. Now, that process of psychometrics, that psychometric process that had to do with validation and reliability and test, retest, and and all of these efforts that go into creating a tool, reveal this sort of concept about psychology, that our concepts are often defined by the tests themselves. So when I was first learning about intelligence, for example, I was told, what's the definition of intelligence? It's what the intelligence test measures. So each intelligence test that's out there has a different definition of intelligence. So we define it by what the test gives us. So that's just sort of a byproduct of the research that's going on regarding to this. Now, at this point, at least according to this article, there's really no sort of defined standard for what imposterism is, even though those three characteristics, all of us can probably relate to that. There's no gold standard definition, so therefore there's no really gold standard measure. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have any measures, and I want to reveal to you, I'm going to review one of the scales. This, again, you see the name, Clance Imposter Phenomenon Scale. This came out in the 80s. It was developed over that period of time by the same person who first identified this in literature. And here, I've got it. It's a bunch of, wrong side. Those are notes. Here's a scale where you answer questions. We say 1, the Likert scale, 1, not at all true, 2 is rarely, 3 is sometimes, 4 is often, is very true. Now, this particular test, what it does, it looks for a global score that we would reveal our degree of imposterism. Now, one of the big things that's going on in terms of in this particular area, and in many areas of psychometrics, is it just one thing, or is it a combination of things? Is it one factor or multifactorial? And if you've watched my series on intelligence, you know that was like the thing. Is it intelligence just one thing that we can get one score on? Same here. We're looking at this particular test gives us one score, but even in the analysis of this test, you can see that there are groupings of certain factors that sort of relate to those three things. And there's just all kinds of discussion going. Is it one factor, two factor, three factor? There's even a fourth factor that we don't really talk about, and that's the fear of success, which is I'll get to that in a minute, but if I remember it. But fear of success being this notion of, I better talk about it now because I'm going to forget it. This notion that if I'm successful, there will now be additional responsibilities on me. I will have to now live up to that expectation by others. So I've raised my own bar, let's say, and sometimes that can inhibit, and then someone can then get into imposterism and say, I got this by luck. This didn't, I had lots of help, blah, blah, blah. Well, let's review this little test. Here's some sample questions. I'm just going to pick them randomly here. Question number 2 is, I can give the impression that I'm more competent than I really am. So this is self-disclosure. Do I think I can do that? And certainly if I rate myself high, I can then attribute that I'm fooling people in a way. I am afraid important people to me may find out that I'm not as capable as they think I am, or that directly related to one of those concepts here. I'll just pick one more question. I'm disappointed at times in my present accomplishment and think I should have accomplished much more. A little bit of attack on my own ability. Now, keeping in mind that the amount of success that we have really has a lot to do with who we're comparing to. How much success is enough success? Is it again, I'm going to refer to my recent videos on intelligence. I came across, one of my favorite researchers, Robert Sternberg, created the Triarchic theory of intelligence. In preparations for the video, I got a little bit more bio on him. And he has 1,500 articles that he's written over the course of his career. Well, if I'm going to compare my success to that, what's enough? That's quite a high bar. So sometimes we fall into the trap of comparing ourselves to profoundly exceptional people who have traits, have lives, have aspects of themselves that are incredibly rare in this world, and those are not necessarily the role models that we want to use to evaluate our own level of achievement. That doesn't mean you don't shoot for it, but you don't use it as an evaluation. Well, I didn't publish as much as Robert Sternberg, so I guess I'm, there's that black and white sort of comparison thing. That's what we want to avoid. But there can be a tendency to look at those role models and say, well, I'm never going to be that way. But that might trap us into this idea of I'm never good enough. There's some deep psychology there now related to parenting, related to significant individuals. It's all part of this. That sense of some people growing up feeling they're never going to be good enough translates into this experience of professional imposterism. So, a little review of one of the tests that's out there. And the next thing I want to talk about is actually my own academic experience and what that meant in terms of the factors that create imposterism. Now, imposterism admittedly was first identified and researched as it occurred in medical students, people getting their doctorate and all that stuff. And there's certain factors about those processes that really do encourage the development of this sort of self-perception. It's faulty self-perception. So to give you my own story, when you're pursuing a doctorate, there's an interesting process of you're trying to reach the terminal degree, the highest level of academic achievement, and to receive that. And when I first encountered that goal within myself, I reviewed that goal with a colleague of mine, and he asked me why I wanted to accomplish that goal. And I went on some sort of flowery language about, high achievement, gold ring, esteem, privilege, and all that, which are all true. Those are all aspects of that. And he, in his wisdom, was, shaking his head. And further, maybe in another video, I'll go into all of that, what he advised me in terms of how I would approach this. But in the end, he referred to the process as a rite of passage. And having then completed that rite of passage, I can definitively agree with the fact that this is a rite of passage. And if you do any anthropological studies or when you see rites of passage, everything from circumcision to running on hot coals, anyone, and setting aside the circumcision, it's certainly like running on hot coals, if I can imagine what that is. It's sort of this process that you go through that's like this. So you have a topic that you're passionate about. You want to do research. This is all the dissertation process, the big research project. And in fact, you have this group of people called this committee who have the authority to determine whether or not you're good enough to become part of the academy. So this group of individuals, by their role, is set upon a pedestal. And so you're interacting with these individuals and, nuts and bolts are, you're continuing through this process of developing this 5-chapter document, hundreds of pages long, submitting it to this committee, and it comes back all red. And you submit it to them again, and it comes back all red. And you do this over and over again, and over the course of at least 3 years of doing this. So basically, you're getting hammered with this idea of you're not good enough, it's not good enough, it's not good enough. Now, this is instructive because this is how you attain that achievement, but it also has this sort of frustrating sort of quality to it of like, am I ever going to be good enough? And it can also develop this perception of those individuals in their role. Well, they must be perfect. They must be able to pump this stuff out on the first draft. And there's this sort of elevation of those individuals. Now, that was not entirely my experience. I was a little older going in, and I was a little bit more experienced as an instructor. So I knew from personal experience that professors are not perfect. And I had a personal relationship with these individuals that were, friendly relationship. And it was a little bit less fire than it might have been in some people's experience. But often it's been found that individuals who have gone through that process may develop a sense of imposterism, coming to the conclusion that essentially they never really achieved that perfection, but their committee simply got tired of dealing with them and pushed them through. And therefore, so they're like, okay, I've achieved this goal, but because I went through this process of no, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. Okay, we're going to let that's good enough now. Then you're like, oh, is it like barely good enough? Or is it just, I just like passed that one little line? I mean, just all these sort of self-depreciating sort of ideas that can come in that really ferment into this idea of imposter syndrome, which tends to be pretty common, not popular, among grad students. This sense of like, I don't really know this stuff. So that, combined with comparing themselves to mentors who have been studying this stuff for decades, wrote the definitive book on it, you're kind of setting yourself up for this sense that I'm simply not good enough. So that particular experience, that within the academic world of achieving a doctorate, is sort of an example. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen in other areas. You can get a promotion and feel like, oh, they think I'm really good at this. I don't think I'm really that good. I just got this by luck. I happen to be in the right place. They like me, or, whatever. It can be any aspect of our achievement. We can then develop this sense of, I'm not worthy of this. So let's take a look. And I want to give a shout out here to actually where I got this particular set of information here. Laura Kilby, researcher at Sheffield Hallam University in the UK, wrote in The Psychologist, I think it's a UK version of that, in 2020, shaking off the shackles of imposterism. And all the articles that I reviewed for this particular segment of Dr. K's Psychobabble, that was really a good one. It was for a general audience. She actually even asserted within, in the conclusion, that she was a little nervous, experiencing a little imposter syndrome, actually publishing for a more general audience, as opposed to the academic papers that she, you can hide behind the language and the methodology. So it's a very interesting self-disclosure on the part of this person, and a very, very neat way of packaging this so that all of us can both understand what imposter syndrome is and how we experience it, but also what we can do about it. So let's take a look at what she has to say here. I have my 3 characteristics of what is imposterism. We're going to take these on one at a time. Other people have an inflated perception of our ability. So what do we do about that? Well, first, we recognize there are no gods, just people. And when we think, and I'm going to use the example of the dissertation, when we think about those individuals who are continually saying, no, not good enough, not good enough, there are no gods, they're just people. They cannot promise me perfection any more than I can promise them perfection. This is a rite of passage. It is not a declaration of my abilities. It is a process of going through. When somebody takes a chance on your abilities and gives you that promotion, they're not saying you have to be just like me. They're saying you have accomplished, or you have shown me the ability for you to take on these new challenges. And perfection is not the answer. Now, that doesn't mean that you might not find yourself in a situation where they're demanding perfection. I've been in supervisory positions. This actually happened within social work. I was given a caseload that my supervisor was unable to make movement. It was a set of clients that he was unable to connect with. He then passed them on to me. I was the new guy, passed them on to me, and then got on my case for not connecting with them after he had tried for a whole year. And so that kind of like, I couldn't do it, but I'm going to expect you to do it. That can happen. That's true. But ultimately, we have to see other people in our world as just as fallible as we are, even though they may have achieved great things, or they're ahead of you. They are role models, but they're still human. Now, those individuals, of course, they're on our what I call the looking glass committee, which refers to the looking glass theory of individuals that we select, and we put them on this committee, and we bounce our achievements off them to see if we're doing okay. This is a very functional thing, but we have to recognize that those individuals in our lives that we place on that committee in order to get feedback about our lives are human too, and are fallible, not perfect. Therefore, you don't have to be perfect either. So that kind of takes care of the first one here. So we have other people have inflated perceptions of our ability. Perhaps we have an overestimate of their abilities. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe we think they're perfect when they're not, and we need to take that out of the equation. Now, secondly, look at our, as my computer does this weird thing every once in a while, we look at fear that our true abilities will be uncovered. We want to be able to, when we reframe the abilities of others, it actually allows us to reframe ours. And we need to ask this question: who do we need to be good enough for? Now, in my own experience, on a day-to-day basis, my expertise in my field needs to be good enough for my students. On a professional basis, I try to be good enough to publish and present at conferences with my peers or to hold conversations. I can look at all my audiences. Where's my audiences and where do I need to be good enough? And truthfully, the standard held, let's say to present at a conference, is pretty low. Not all of them, but if you have something to say, a conference is a really, really interesting place to start because it's a verbal presentation, which I feel comfortable with. It's sort of within my wheelhouse, but it's also it's a format for a more raw presentation of ideas. So I feel very comfortable in there, so the guidelines they're certainly higher because my peers are going to be reflecting that. Now, keeping in mind when I present and somebody comes up to me and says, I don't agree with you, that's why I presented, was to hear that feedback so that my perceptions, my ideas can grow. The same with publishing, which I've never done, so I can't speak to that. But in terms of presenting at conferences, you present ideas and then some people come up and like, I totally agree. And then some people come up and they'll engage in a discussion. Well, I'm thinking this and I'm thinking that. That's the whole idea. Again, it goes back to that first one. They're not at any more pedestal than I am, even though at one time I did a presentation and the keynote speaker of the conference took me aside. Like he was the celebrated individual, and we had a discussion about it. And I have to tell you, I was on pins and needles. It was like, this guy's I've seen his name. He's editor of one of the journals that I read, and it was just an encounter in that individual. And now Eric Landrum was his name, was an incredibly gracious human being, and he was very very kind and easy to get along with. And so I benefited from his personality in that meeting. But it made for a great discussion, a little nerve-wracking, but made for a great discussion with an individual who had achieved much more than I have. And in a way, I looked up to him for that. And but who is your audience? Okay, to be good enough to your customer, to be good enough for your kids, to be good enough, and being wary about who you're performing for allows us to check ourselves in terms of how good do we need to be good enough. Now, as we move to our last, when we attribute success to luck and other external factors, I love this one. It's true. Success is a combination of internal effort and external luck, help from others, timing, those kinds of things. But it's less about who owns the success as to who benefits from the success. So this is a change in mindset. You have an idea. And this is really where academic integrity is a really good example. When you're writing about ideas, you always have to attribute the use of other people's ideas. Like I attributed what I'm talking about right now to Dr. Kilby. We attribute those ideas because that's where I learned them. That doesn't mean that I can't then kind of own that a little bit. And the bottom line is, right now, as I'm incorporating this into this video, It's who's going to benefit from this. I don't need to own that, but I can be a communicator of that idea. So you can come up with an idea, or you can read about something and you can bring it to a new situation. And you can, and it's, well, you don't have to have come up with the solution. You can say, I read this, I read about it. And I'm coming in, in fact, sometimes that's a better way. Sometimes if depending on your role within a group, you might say, well, I got this from this article that I read, and I think this might be a good solution. At the same time, being equally, individuals are not perfect. My solution's not going to be perfect. Their debate and their either accepting or rejecting is not going to be because of that. And nothing's being uncovered. I am simply looking at a way of applying an idea that I heard of. Maybe it's an idea that I heard of that I combine with my own ideas, and I'm putting that. Again, it's reframing the idea of why are we engaging this as our audience and how it benefits them. What changes? Not that I came up with the solution, it's that we came up with a solution. Now, maybe in private, I might go, I really enjoy being an idea person. And this is something that I enjoy in many of the committee work that I've done and problem solving with students. I enjoy the fact that I can be creative and that interacting with people around me stimulates that creativity in me and allows me to come up with creative solutions and whatnot. But the end is the benefit. What's the benefit of that? So we're looking here at 3 steps. Humanizing the individuals that we look up to. Understanding that that we don't have to fear that our abilities are going to be uncovered by those individuals because we're not perfect, they're not perfect. And finally, this idea that in truth, our success is a combined effort of that. And we can validate that, and we don't need to own it all. We don't need to say that everything was me. We can say that other people helped me get here. Get us, again, that supervisor shift, you go with the supervisor and other people helped me get here. And now I have these responsibilities and I'm going to, do the best that I can. So I hope this has been helpful both in identifying, well, I'm not sure if it's just 2 things, but first, it happens a lot, therefore you're not alone. Secondly, there is something you can do about this. You don't have to feel that sense of being an imposter all the time. You can go through these steps that I just outlined and reframe things so that you feel better about your own successes and your interaction with other people when you're in that world of your successes. So that is imposterism. If you want to look it up, that's the actual term. Imposter syndrome is how we usually talk about it. So I will see you next time.